Charlie Durkheim, you look a little busy, but I really need to talk to you about something when you have the chance. It's pretty serious, and it's surrounding the drama with my frat. You might have already heard about it.
I'm not a cop, but I'll do what I can. I could also use a break from my studies. What's up?
As I assume you know, there's been a series of suicides on campus, and all of them are involved in Alpha Phi Omega.
That's so terrible.
How did this happen? Who was it?
Zach, Chad, and Dylan, do you remember them from our sociology class?
So, what you're saying is that 3 people killed themselves, and all of this is related to your fraternity?
Yes, I thought since maybe your great-grandfather was Emil Durkheim and he studied suicide, particularly the 3 types of suicide, anomic, egoistic, and altruistic, that you would have some insight as to what happened. From my understanding, his study shows that there are different reasons that people would commit suicide, that what motivates people is not necessarily consistent for everyone. I've overheard other people saying that all of them are the same, but that's just not true. They were all individuals, and it's naive to think that they would all do this for the same reason. This must have happened for different reasons, right? Geez, this is so devastating. First it was Chad a few weeks ago, then Dylan about a week ago, and now Zach a couple of days ago. I don't know why this keeps happening. I know all these guys, and it doesn't seem like something they would do.
I'm sorry that you're being affected by this. Yes, I can definitely work with this. Give me some time and we should definitely meet up later so I can tell you what I've figured out.
Thanks, Charlie. I really appreciate this. I have some ideas about what happened, but it would be really nice to be able to clarify my thoughts with someone else. They were good friends of mine, and I would really like to know more so that I can come to terms with this.
3 types of suicide: altruistic, anomic, and egoistic. This has to be it. There are 3 people who committed suicide involved in this threat. These 3 types will obviously apply, and maybe each person will even have committed each type.
Yeah, I think that's a great use of your great-grandfather's theory, especially if you consider the collective ideas of the frat. Fraternities are highly organized with countless rules and obligations to go to events. The expectations of the fraternities are such a part of the individual, but the individuals in it don't think twice about what they're being asked of. This could be an important consideration for the suicides. What if the practices of the frat, such as social competitions at parties or hazing, were negatively impacting the members without their realization because it was so normative? We should ask the bystander for more information since she was their friends, and since she was in the fraternity as well.
Let's stick to these types of suicides. I think they are the main focus. These types of suicides already exist, and anyone involved in the threat can't be too different. I can probably swing this on my own.
Okay, well, I've also read a lot of social theory for class, and I can also provide alternative perspectives if you're interested.
We'll see. Can you tell me more about each of these people? Why were they acting unusual?
Well, the first guy, Chad, wasn't technically involved in the frat. When we were rushing, he just couldn't take it. We were hanging out a few weeks ago. He seemed fine about being rejected up until that point, but then he just kind of broke down about it.
Was he distant from others? Like, detached?
Well, yeah, kind of. He was always kind of distant and removed from the main crowd at school. He wouldn't go out a lot. He wasn't really involved on campus. He did homework in quieter places, and besides that, he just kind of hung out in his room, watched TV, and smoked weed. I don't know, people sometimes called him a burnout, but he was actually a really wonderful person to spend time with. I always kind of thought the reason he didn't get into the frat was because of this burnout image that people had of him, but it really seems sad to think about that now.
I'm sorry to hear that. Was Chad affected by anything else that made him more distant?
Yeah, his girlfriend broke up with him a few weeks before he passed. It came out of nowhere, and he was really devastated.
It sounds like egoistic suicide to me.
Well, what exactly is that?
Well, it sounds like Chad wasn't particularly integrated into the community around him. Being detached on top of the devastation of being rejected by the frat and his girlfriend could have motivated him to do this.
Hey, can you be a little less analytical about this? She was close to these people.
Can you tell me about Dylan? What was he like?
Well, he was part of the frat, but he was always in the library. I know he was a biochem engineering pre-med major, and that always really stressed him out. But he was especially stressed because things were getting out of control in APO.
Yikes, what do you mean?
Well, APO has already been receiving warnings for excessive and intense hazing, so it doesn't really surprise me that Dylan was so nervous about it. He's really committed to it and even said that he'd do anything to keep it going.
Interesting. So he seemed very invested in the role in his community. Which reminds me, my great-grandfather outlined 3 types of suicide: altruistic, egoistic, and anomic. Maybe one or all three types could apply.
Yeah, it sounds like altruistic suicide, where Dylan was so committed to the in-group that he didn't realize the consequences he was creating.
Valid point. But I think this sounds like an altruistic suicide, where Dylan was so committed to the in-group that he didn't realize the consequences he was creating.
Wish I just said that.
Okay, so did Dylan go through anything leading up to his suicide, or was this completely unexpected?
Well, I think he was going through some really tough times. He was really close with Chad, who had just committed suicide before him. He also had clinical depression, and he felt that really brought down the moods of the group, especially in these rough times. He even started attending less frat events and thinking that his absence might even make the events more fun.
So you think he was trying to protect others by removing himself from the dynamic?
Yeah, actually, I remember him saying something like, "It will just be better for everyone if I didn't go." And it's really too bad that the frat got shut down after he killed himself. He would have loved to see it improve eventually.
Damn. And Zach?
Well, Zach was really involved in APO before it got shut down. He loved to organize formals, he had really great relationships with the alumni, and even contacted them almost every day. And he could remember anything and everything about every frat member. And when the frat did shut down, he seemed so defeated and hopeless.
I'm so sorry. This must be really hard for you. Something I mentioned to Charlie earlier was that the groups of people, like fraternities, are organized and have ways of functioning that make the sense to the group but aren't thought out or questioned. Without the level of organization, the group and the individuals within it can feel out of balance.
Yeah, thank you. I am really having a hard time talking about it.
That must have been chaos, and quite a shift for him. This makes sense. Let's move on.
Yeah, the fraternity was quite a well-oiled machine. Zach's weeks and weekends were filled with frat meetings and events. Without it, he and some of the others didn't know what to do with their time. I think he and some of them may have not even had other interests outside of the frat since it was so consuming. I think they go through a crisis with their social community being ripped out from under them. Honestly, Zach walked around like a zombie. He couldn't seem to find a way to direct himself.
I have an idea for Zach as well. He must have committed anomic suicide.
Can you explain how it would be anomic?
Naturally, one would commit anomic suicide when there is a lack of regulation in their life. It's like they no longer find a basis for existence. Zach was lost without the busy scheduled events of the frat and had no personal goals without it. He had nothing else to do with his time and took his life for it. In fact, it shifted his position in the social structure, removing him from an integrated role in society. Without moral guidance, Zach lost what was important to him.
This sounds like it could definitely fit, but I don't think it's that simple. I still feel like we could consider other variables that have contributed to the suicides.
Yeah, I was wondering about how self-perception would play a role.
We could consider other factors, but I really don't think we'll have to. After hearing about all these guys and the way they acted, I feel as though we had an accurate assessment on why exactly they committed suicide.
Okay, this has been really helpful so far. Thank you for sitting down with me. I need to head to class, but we should follow up soon.
Hey, I didn't know you were going to eat right now. We could walk together.
Yeah, it's so funny. Can I sit with you?
Yeah, go for it.
Thanks. You know, Durkheim really seems to have it all figured out. I was going to offer up some ideas as well, but he seems to think that he doesn't really need them.
I was kind of feeling the same way, actually. He just always seems to second guess what I'm saying. It's like his ideas are absolute and mine are just, I don't know, other?
Yeah, I've kind of noticed that. It must be really frustrating. I mean, how can he assume that only his ideas are valid? Why can't you contest his power?
Well, I don't think I want his power, but it's true that he always thinks that his ideas have more validity than mine, as if I have to work to be recognized as a woman. Anyway, what were your ideas?
Well, I don't think these suicides perfectly fit into the categories that he put them into, especially since I have talked to more people about all of it. I do agree that they relate to the ideas of altruism, anomie, and egoism, but I've been reading this article by Mead and I feel like it applies. Chad, even though he was a bit of a slacker, really cared a lot about what his social circle thought of him and valued it to a point where he just hated himself. The rejection, both from the frat and his girlfriend, was his own interpretation of the community's values onto his own self-image. His internal perception of the reactions of his community resulted in him appropriating those ideas to his own self-concept, which is part of why he couldn't handle it. If if they acted like they felt a certain way about him, he really would just take it so personally, and he really started to believe it.
It's like he's using his body as a self-conscious identity when it comes to social situations. Wow, Durkheim really needs to hear these ideas. And Zach?
Well, Zach really loved what he did. He was so invested in the organizational side of things. I mean, he was an upstanding and involved citizen in the frat community, but really, he was a self-absorbed jock to everyone else outside of the frat. The selves we represent as performers in society allow for multiple roles, even when those roles contradict one another. Irving Goffman always said, "As performers, we are merchants of morality. We sell our values to others in our multiplicity of social roles and behaviors." He felt so conflicted in his contrived behavior and felt like he was almost lying to himself and others. Even though every version of himself was still him, there just wasn't a proper balance. His upstanding moral self ultimately took over, so his loud, obnoxious jock self and its needs ultimately became suppressed. One just took over the other, which resulted in his suicide.
True. Maybe we can bring these ideas to Durkheim. I have to head to class, but I'm really happy we got to talk about other possibilities, especially since we both know Chad, Dylan, and Zach's personalities a bit more. Hey Charlie, are you alright?
I just don't get it. I really don't.
What's wrong?
Well, I ran into the bystander, and we were talking about the people who committed suicide.
Chad, Dylan, and Zach. They had names.
Right. Well, she was saying that they had other components to their self-images besides what we already know about them in their frat community. But that doesn't make sense. If they committed these forms of suicide, they had to have acted in these 3 specific ways, because how the greater community dictates behavior, and the kind of behavioral standards and values it upholds. She must be lying.
Well, I'm not so sure. I've been talking to Kelly myself, and we both have some other ideas about the suicides. We think there are some other reasons the suicides may have happened.
You talked to her before going through me first? Don't you know you have to get these interactions approved by me?
Well, yes, we do go to the same school. We ran into each other. We were just chatting.
You're just being dramatic. You don't understand this case. Ask me before you consult my informants again.
Your informants?
Hey, he doesn't have any right to tell you what isn't valid. Your opinion is just as important as his. I swear to God, women have been limited their entire lives. They've always been living in the shadow of a man. Oh, you think and do such and such because you're a woman. The man thinks he's right just by virtue of being a man.
You're absolutely right. I just feel like he doesn't believe me regardless of what I contribute.
I'm sorry he's treating you this way. It's messed up. You should see how far this lead takes you. Maybe try talking to Kelly again. Also, I think you should confront Charlie about how you're feeling. He thinks you think the way you do because you're a woman. He just thinks of himself as the end-all be-all, the absolute and objective human, which is definitely false. You just think this way because it is the truth.
I hadn't thought about it that way before. Thank you. Durkheim, I need to talk to you. I know you're wrong about the suicides. There's more to it. Also, you're using misogyny to invalidate my opinions.
I don't understand what you're talking about.
Exactly. You haven't listened to anything I've said throughout this whole case. You treat me like I'm inessential, that I'm incapable of doing anything by myself. And you make me go through you for everything. I feel like I'm in a cage. You're forcing me to be dependent on you for success.
Well, what do you think happened?
The suicides happened because Dylan, Chad, and Zach suffered with conflicts that surrounded their self-image. Zach acted differently in his front stage identity and his backstage one. He presented himself differently to his frat as he did privately. Chad was hyper-aware of what others thought of him and let it define and destruct what he thought of himself. Dylan's own concept of who he was ended up being an embodied comparison of what he believed others thought of him. It's not just as simple as the theories that your great-grandfather wrote about, and I will not have you talk down to me and over me and second-guess everything I say. As a woman, my ideas and thoughts are valid, and if you're going to fully understand why these suicides happened, you have to listen to me, because I think you're treating me as other, and you're forcing me to be validated via your authority. Both of these are forms of oppression.
I guess I just attributed my great-grandfather's truth to his masculinity, without critiquing his content. I'm sorry for assuming your thoughts weren't worth listening to.
Thank you. And I'd be happy to elaborate on my thoughts later. Also, next time we work together, I hope you consider the implications of your actions before assuming the truth.
I will. And I guess I'll be more conscious of my placement in society, too. I hope to improve on that.
It'll be a gift.
His studies show that there are different reasons for why people would commit suicide. Reasons that people would commit suicide. Oh no.
I'm so... Just keep going.
Yes, of course. I'll see you later.
That was a lot. Maybe we could start...
Cut.
Your screen went dark. Should I keep going? Durkheim, I need to talk to you.
I'm busy.
Sorry.
I couldn't figure out the angle. I was just like...
The suicides happened because Dylan, Chad, and Zach suffered with conflicts that surrounded their self-image. Jack, no.
Jack.
Nice.
I did it.
Close the laptop.
One.
No, don't hit it that hard. You're a regular high
I don't know what
That's practice.
Okay, that's good.
That was great.
Yeah, that's good.
Your informants. Don't take that. You really should exit this way.
Hey, he doesn't have any right to tell you what is. Sorry. I'm not reading. Definitely off the screen.
I'm sorry to hear that.
No, wait, Chrissy, you're
Oh no! To get improved eventually.